My parents adopted a child without telling me, and now they expect me to play the role of a caregiver. I'm 27 years old and live on my own in a different city, with a stable job and a social life I'm proud of. My parents are in their mid-50s, retired, and have always been relatively independent. So imagine my shock when I recently visited them for a holiday weekend, only to find out they had adopted a child, a 9-year-old boy named Leo. They didn't tell me beforehand. No phone call, no heads up, nothing. I walked into their home expecting the usual quiet weekend with them, only to be greeted by a little boy calling my parents mom and dad. At first, I thought it was some kind of joke, but then they explained that they had been fostering Leo for about 6 months and decided to adopt him permanently. I was stunned. I asked why they hadn't told me, and their response was that they wanted to surprise me. Surprise me? Adopting a child isn't the same as announcing you've bought a new car. They said they had been considering adoption for a while since they missed having kids around the house. Now, I don't have anything against Leo. He seems like a sweet kid, and I can't fault him for the decisions my parents made. But here's where things took a turn. Over the course of my visit, I realized my parents have very specific expectations for my role in Leo's life. They kept talking about how lucky Leo is to have a big sibling like me, and how I'd be able to help him adjust. They even hinted at me taking Leo for weekends or over school breaks so they could get a breather. My mom said, "You're so great with kids, it'll be easy for you to bond with him." When I asked them how they planned to manage raising a child at their age, they brushed it off, saying they'd figure it out. But it's clear they're already overwhelmed. They were tired all weekend, snapping at each other, and barely keeping up with Leo's energy. The final straw came when my dad casually suggested I could help out financially by putting some money toward Leo's extracurricular activities. He even floated the idea of me setting up a college fund for him, since you don't have kids of your own yet. I was speechless. I told them that while I respected their decision to adopt, it was their responsibility to raise Leo, not mine. I reminded them that I'm an adult with my own life and obligations, and that I wasn't consulted about this massive change in the family dynamic. My mom got teary-eyed and said I was being selfish, that family helps family. My dad accused me of being unsupportive and questioned whether I even cared about them or Leo. Since that weekend, my parents have been texting me nonstop, guilt-tripping me for not being more involved. They've even started sending me pictures of Leo, saying things like, "He's so excited to get to know his big sister better." I've been avoiding their calls because I don't know how to handle this. I feel like I've been blindsided. I didn't ask for a sibling, and I certainly didn't sign up to be a part-time caregiver or financial supporter. I love my parents, but I think they've made a reckless decision, and now they're trying to shift some of the responsibility onto me. Am I wrong for setting boundaries here? I didn't agree to this, and I feel like my parents are being incredibly unfair by expecting me to play such a big role in Leo's life without even asking me first. Update 1. It's been a few weeks since my initial post, and things with my parents have only gotten more complicated. After I decided to take some space to process everything, they ramped up their efforts to involve me in Leo's life. It started small, pictures and updates about how Leo was doing, which, on their own, I didn't mind. But then the texts became more insistent, like, "You should call Leo, he'd love to hear from you." Or, "Don't forget you're his big sister now." I ignored most of these messages thinking they'd get the hint. But instead of backing off, they doubled down. My mom called me in tears one night saying Leo had asked why his sister didn't like him. I was floored. I told her I never said, I didn't like him. I just wasn't ready to be thrust into a sibling role overnight. She said he's just a child and doesn't understand why I'm not around more. I tried to explain that I wasn't consulted about this adoption and that I needed time to figure out how I fit into this new dynamic, but she cut me off saying, "You're an adult. It's not about you anymore. It's about what's best for Leo." The emotional manipulation didn't stop there. My dad called me a few days later with a different tactic. He wasn't crying or begging. Instead, he went for the disappointed parent angle. He said he thought he raised me to value family and that he couldn't believe I was being so cold toward them and Leo. He even brought up old memories of how they supported me through college and my first job, implying that I owed them for everything they'd done for me. I'll admit, I started to feel guilty. Maybe I was being selfish. Maybe I wasn't giving Leo a fair chance. So, against my better judgment, I agreed to visit them again for a weekend to spend time with my new brother. The visit was a disaster. The moment I arrived, it was clear my parents were overwhelmed. Leo is a ball of energy, constantly needing attention, and my parents, bless them, just can't keep up. Within hours, my mom was asking me to watch him while she ran errands. Then my dad suggested I take him to the park so they could have some quiet time. By the end of the day, I felt like I was the one parenting Leo, not them. During dinner, my dad casually brought up the idea of me taking Leo for a week over the summer. He framed it like it was already decided, saying, "It'll be great for you two to bond and it'll give your mom and me a much-needed break." When I hesitated, my mom jumped in, saying, "You've always been so good with kids. This will be easy for you." I finally snapped. I told them I wasn't comfortable being put in this position and that I wasn't going to become a substitute parent for Leo. I said it was their decision to adopt him, not mine, and they needed to figure out how to manage their responsibilities without relying on me. My mom started crying, saying I was abandoning them when they needed me most. My dad accused me of being ungrateful and said I was punishing them for trying to give Leo a better life. Leo, poor kid, just sat there looking confused and upset. I left early the next morning, feeling completely drained. Since then, my parents have been blowing up my phone, alternating between guilt-tripping and outright anger. They've even started calling other family members, telling them I'm refusing to help with Leo and painting me as some kind of selfish monster. Now I'm getting messages from aunts and uncles telling me to do the right thing and step up for my family. I don't know what to do anymore. I feel like I'm being backed into a corner, and no matter what I choose, I'll end up being the bad guy. I'm trying to stand my ground, but the pressure is unbearable. Update 2. After my last update, I decided I needed to take control of the situation before it spiraled even further. The constant guilt-tripping and pressure from my parents, and now extended family, were driving me to the brink. I realized that if I didn't set firm boundaries, I'd be stuck in this cycle forever. The first thing I did was reach out to a family therapist. I wanted to make sure I wasn't being unreasonable, so I explained the whole situation to them. How my parents adopted Leo without telling me, their expectations for me to step in as a caregiver, and the emotional manipulation they were using to try to guilt me into compliance. The therapist validated my feelings, telling me it was completely understandable to feel blindsided and overwhelmed. They also emphasized that my parents' decision to adopt Leo was theirs alone, and they shouldn't expect me to shoulder responsibilities I never agreed to. With that reassurance, I drafted a long message to my parents. I knew a face-to-face conversation would just end in more guilt and tears, so I decided writing everything out would help me stay clear and focused. In the message, I outlined my feelings and set firm boundaries. 1. I love them and respect their decision to adopt Leo, but I was never consulted about it. 2. I will not be taking on the role of a secondary parent or caregiver. I made it clear that while I'm open to being a supportive sister figure in the long term, that doesn't mean babysitting, taking him for extended stays, or becoming their fallback plan. 3. The constant guilt-tripping and emotional manipulation need to stop. I explained how it was affecting my mental health and making me resentful, which was the last thing I wanted. I ended the message by saying I was happy to work on building a relationship with Leo on my own terms, but only if they respected my boundaries. My parents didn't take it well. My mom called me almost immediately after reading the message, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. She accused me of being heartless and abandoning them. My dad followed up with a much angrier call, saying I was destroying this family and ruining Leo's chance at a stable life. I tried to stay calm and reiterate my points, but it was like talking to a wall. The fallout didn't stop there. My parents escalated their campaign against me, reaching out to more relatives to paint me as selfish and ungrateful. Suddenly, I was getting calls and messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years, all telling me how disappointed they were in me and how I was hurting my parents. At one point, one of my aunts, who's always been close to my mom, called to talk some sense into me. She said my parents had sacrificed so much for me over them
and
that it was my duty to help them now. I told her I wasn't going to argue about it and ended the call, but it left me shaken. Meanwhile, my parents started trying to involve Leo directly. They sent me a video of him holding up a drawing he made of me and saying, "I miss you, big sister." I nearly broke down watching it. I felt awful for Leo. None of this was his fault, and he didn't deserve to be caught in the middle. But I couldn't let myself be manipulated like that. A few days later, I got another text from my mom. This one was shorter than usual, but no less loaded. "We thought we raised you better than this. I hope you can live with yourself." That message hit me like a punch to the gut. For a moment, I doubted everything. Was I really being selfish? Should I just give in for the sake of peace? But then I remembered what the therapist said. It's not selfish to protect your boundaries. I've since decided to limit contact with my parents for now. It's not a decision I made lightly, but the constant pressure and manipulation were becoming too much for me to handle. I've started focusing on my own life again, spending time with friends, pursuing hobbies, and even considering moving further away to create some physical distance as well. As for Leo, I still feel torn. He's just a kid and he didn't ask for any of this. I've thought about reaching out to him directly when he's older, maybe writing him a letter explaining everything. But for now, I need to prioritize my own well-being. I don't know what the future holds for my relationship with my parents, or Leo, but I've realized that it's okay to put myself first sometimes. I hope they'll come to understand that someday.